I would also like to introduce to you our keynote speaker today. Troy Haugen is the Director of Career and College Readiness at Country Service Cooperative in Fergus Falls. He is here to outline barriers that impact student transition from secondary school to a career in manufacturing. Our manufacturing community has a role to play in shaping the future of career and technical education. I will now turn it over to Troy to reimagine education in Minnesota.
Thanks, Nicole. Good morning. As Nicole said, I'm Troy Haugen. I work for Lakes Country Service Cooperative. I've been there now for, I think it's been 8 years now. Before that, I've been a teacher and a school administrator in the region. I've actually lived in this area for all my life. We're going to just have a conversation today, if that's okay. But feel free to interrupt too if you have questions. So. This first image that I'm kind of popping up on the screen is what wasn't yesterday. It wasn't taken even in the time that I was in school, but I suspect none of you that are on this Zoom today. This isn't when any of you were in school. But frankly, it's not really all that different from what school looks like today. Let's be very honest. School is typically designed to be in rows, in columns and rows, just like a spreadsheet. And it's designed to do that for a variety of different reasons, but it is what it is. COVID and this pandemic that we're living in the midst of right now, and we're hoping that we're on some path out of, has certainly shifted education. We have deep conversations about education, and I oftentimes, frankly, ask the question, has COVID shifted education, or is COVID? The question I guess I ask is, has COVID changed the trajectory of education, or has COVID accelerated the trajectory of education? But really, this is the image a lot of times of what education looks like right now. And if you look at the difference, there isn't all that much difference, with the exception of protective measures with students that include some space and face coverings. Otherwise, functionally, there isn't all that much difference. Yes, there are different things that happen in schools, very different things that happen in schools now versus when I was in school 30 years ago. And there's other people that are probably in this Zoom space that were in school before me and after me. But, really, if you boil down education, there is not been a huge functional shift in how we educate kids. And there probably needs to be. Let's really be honest, there probably needs to be. And that's a larger conversation, obviously, than what we're here for today. But I think there's in this space that we're really convening around, there's really some pretty big and cool opportunities to talk about. And really, I want to get down to some really strong nuts and bolts messages that I want to talk about today. And one of the first things I want to talk about is the importance of words and how impactful words are and how much really words matter. So we talk about, in the K-12 space, we talk about this as career and technical education, or CTE, and what career and technical education is versus what vocational education is, or voc-ed, or vocational. And you've all probably heard the word vocational and vocational education, but the reality is vocational or vocational education has really been something that's been gone since the 60s. And yet there's this really almost fond memory of vocational that still lives within our vocabulary. Unfortunately, that has a that's not really palatable for many people. And that's not palatable for many people because it invokes an image. So I think one of the things we have to fundamentally have a conversation about is what's the difference between career and technical education and vocational education, or vocational or voc ed. So let's talk about that. And these words really, really, really matter. So what career and technical education is it's in this definition is a little bit of a I used a little bit of a creative license around this, but this comes from the federal law, the Perkins federal law, 21st century, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which was just reauthorized in 2018. And really what it is, it's an organized educational activities that include a sequenced, rigorous academic and technical coursework leading to high skill, high wage, in-demand careers. Now, recognize what those bolded words are. Sequenced, it means it really increases in rigor. It increases, and it's not the same thing over and over again. It's sequenced. It's academic and it's technical, and it leads towards careers. And they're on the secondary side, they're programs that lead to technical skill proficiency and/or, it's not just an or, recognized post-secondary credentials. That means it really wants you to get to a post-secondary recognized credential. It doesn't want you to finish high school and be done. It wants you to continue to move. It talks about multiple entrance and exit points. It wants you to always be a lifelong learner in whatever we're doing. It wants you, if we're talking about the health career field, it wants you to think about things in the realm of, okay, if it wants you to get to be a med aid or a CNA, it wants you to be able to move in and out. So at some point you can become an LPN or an RN or a nurse practitioner or a physician or whatever that whole career field becomes. And you can move that into the whole realm of also manufacturing or agriculture or any of these technical fields. It doesn't talk about ending somewhere. It talks about continuous movement within careers. It also includes competency-based, work-based, and I should say and/or. It's not just an or, other applied learning. It talks about applying these skills. It's not just learning them. It talks about applying things through competency-based or work-based or other applied learning. And it also, and these are all ands, these are not just ors, it includes career exploration and development. Look at that word development. Again, that's really important. These really nuanced words are incredibly important. So that's really the nuts and bolts of what career and technical education is. So us on this K-12 or this E-12 side are really focused on this overarching context around career and technical education, which of course manufacturing is a part of. It's a large part of it. Now let's look on the other side and talk about vocational and what that means. Vocational was designed to be instructional programs or specific courses provided for specific skills to function in a specific job. It's about a job, not a career. It focuses on training, not development. And in secondary skills, it was most of the time applied for life skills, not employability skills. It was really about home ec, so sewing, cooking, and basic home repairs. That is very, very, very different than career and technical education. So when we talk about vocational and we talk about career and technical education, we're talking about two very, very different things. And if we start conflating those two different words, we're sending really, really bad mixed messages. And when we're sending those bad mixed messages, unfortunately, guess who loses? It's the students. And guess who also loses? The parents that are influencing those students, because this is the image they're given. Career and technical education, if we apply it to manufacturing, what we're seeing is what's on the left. What we're talking about is modern manufacturing. When we talk about vocational, what we're implying is what it used to be 1965 and prior. And I'm using 1965 as a, kind of a date that I'm pulling out. There are pieces that are very technical to 1965. To be very honest with you, there are turning points to 1965, but I'm using it more as a generality. But I can probably guarantee none of you on this Zoom have a facility that looks like what you have on the right, or perhaps equipment that looks like that you have on the right. But I'll tell you that there are shops in our region, in our secondary schools, that have a feel of what's on the right. And it's because the mental model around what we have not shifted from vocational to career and technical education. So words really, 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 really matter. And I'm not going to pick on poor Mr. Wutsky from Fergus Falls, but what's on the front of their building? And it's not because of Dennis. It's not because of Mr. Wutsky, but it's because the mental model has never shifted. We still have this mental model that it's about vocational, because we've never shifted to that mental model. We've never forced ourselves to have this revelation around what career and technical education is. If you listen to, I have this privilege of listening to a lot of legislative hearings, and you can tell the people that understand the difference between career and technical education, the legislators that understand the difference between career and technical education and vocational education, because they talk that way. And how do we get that understanding and that shift of mental model to change? Because until that mental model shifts in E12 education, you all will still be frustrated, will continue to be frustrated with the mental model shift between the image on the right versus the image on the left. I don't want to make it as simple as that, but really a lot of it is as simple as that. So how do we look at this from a bigger picture? So as I said, E12 education, and I talk about things as E12 because really our shift in education on our side, and it's not proprietary, but it is not just K-12 education anymore. We talk about education is as early childhood education, so birth until they graduate now. So we don't talk about it as K-12 anymore, education anymore, even though I'll slip up and say it that way sometimes. We talk about it as E12 education now. So has anybody seen this? And I'm asking like you're all in the same place here and I can hear you, but thumbs up if you have thumbs up to say if you've seen this, it's called the career wheel. Has anybody seen this? So, okay, a couple of people have. So this is the career wheel. And this is basically, it's using what's called the Haugen's codes. And it separates it out to career fields, clusters, and pathways. So this is, in essence, how we see, how we categorize career fields in education. The top green field, and I don't know why they're colored this way, is agriculture, food, and natural resources. They're categorized in the purple around clockwise around the right is arts, communications, information systems. So this is IT and pieces like that. The next one, the orange one, is engineering, manufacturing, technology. So your manufacturing sector is in that orange field, but it's also clustered with engineering and other types of technology. The one in the middle, down the middle on the bottom is health science technology. The blue is human services. The yellow one, I'm a guy. They're all kind of, it's either yellow, green, blue, or whatever, but I'm sure that's something else than that. Is business management and administration. So those are those career fields. And then obviously there's clusters within those career fields. And then in the middle is called foundation knowledge and skills. And what those are oftentimes referred to as are those soft skills. And I'll tell you right now, anybody that knows me really well, is I hate it when we call them soft skills because words matter. And when we call them soft skills, it makes it sound like it's easy. And I can guarantee you all know this, that hire people. Soft skills, I actually call them employability skills. I'd rather call them employability skills. It makes it sound like it's easy, and we all know that there's a lot of adults that don't have employability skills either. But really, what we try to do in E12 is we try to we try to talk about those employability skills. And as we talked about, when we go back to career and technical education, it talked about sequencing and increasing rigor. So we start and embed all of those foundation knowledge and skills, those employability skills, and then we start working our way out. And how do we explore all of these components? So we're moving as the school districts have the opportunities to explore all of these fields, all of these career fields as well, because that's really what we're trying to do. You know, the early exposure we have to all of these components, the better off we have. So this is really the big picture component of career and technical education. Is how do we, at the earliest level, expose to all of these places, and then find a way to sequence into more specific places within these career fields, into perhaps maybe some of the career clusters. Knowing that those foundation knowledge and skills, those employability skills, also are not ever done. You can never fully check the box. I mean, those are lifelong learning components that you and I, everybody in this room should be learning at all the time. So, yeah, Nicole had kind of indicated this too, that we've kind of had the start of this Manufacturing Education Solutions Advisory Group. And the members, and I think you've probably seen some of this stuff in some of the publications that have come out in the emails. I've seen those too, but you know, on the left side is kind of who's been part of that, and a couple of you are on this Zoom as well. And we've had 2 formal meetings. First meeting, we kind of started with this identification of barriers and categorizing them. And those of you who are on this Zoom were frustrated with me that I wouldn't let you go to solutions. We kept hardcore on what the problems are. And then second meeting, we kept on those problems. We clarified those barriers, and we kind of said, what do we need to learn more? And then we've been silent for a while. But part of it is we've been silent for a while because there's been things that have been going on. So our next kind of steps are we're gonna further clarify what some of these things are, create some goals, and then kind of figure out what some of those intersections and levers are. But one of the things that I want to talk about is what have we identified? So, and probably none of these things are going to surprise you all, but there's kind of 4 categories. We're going to go through each one of these categories. This first category that we decided we kind of came up with was this policy barrier category. And we had 3 main policy barriers. The first policy barrier were labor age restrictions for students in work-based learning programs. And we also realized that we all kind of need to learn a little bit more about what those are, because within labor age restrictions, there are certainly federal Department of Labor restrictions, there are state Department of Labor and Industry restrictions, and then that are in law, and then there's Department of Labor and Industry, state Department of Labor and Industry restrictions that are in rule. And then you all probably have some things that are within your some restrictions that you probably have within your insurance requirements. So, and we are also recognizing that some of those pieces in those labor age restrictions are really antiquated, and those restrictions that are in that are antiquated are in what are called Minnesota Administrative Rule. And Minnesota Administrative Rule are agency rules, meaning that the state agencies that oversee them have flexibility of opening those rules and changing them. And they oftentimes also don't want to do that for a variety of different reasons. So we recognize that, and there's the state agency that does that is Department of Labor and Industry, Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. So we recognize that that's kind of a big problem. For example, one of the, some of them they're old enough to say things like they restrict ice harvesting for 16 and 17-year-olds. Well, how many industries still do ice harvesting? So do you think maybe perhaps that they need to update some of the things that they're still calling out ice harvesting, So let's just say that there's some updates that need to be done. So the second policy barrier that has come up is state graduation requirements are not in alignment with the actual needs and desires of all students. And some of those things that I have a good understanding of what those state requirements are, but the group just generally probably doesn't. And then the third policy barrier is there's this pretty big disconnect between secondary teacher licensing pathways and post-secondary faculty credentialing requirement. So there's a good ability for post-secondary teachers, college teachers, particularly at our two-year colleges, to move into a secondary teaching opportunity, but that converse isn't really possible because of policy barriers. So then because of the opportunities of dual credit, there's Minnesota doesn't really have opportunities for career and technical education dual credit because of some policy barriers, versus in the general education realm, there's a lot of opportunities for students to have dual credit. So there's a big issue there that we all kind of need to learn a little bit about. So that's kind of that first bucket of policy barriers. The second policy bucket of barriers is these mental model barriers. These pieces that we kind of started with is that there's this really big misunderstanding about career and technical education, and I just call it the CTE identity crisis. We kind of started with that. There's this basic undervaluing of CTE and employability. And I kind of go back to the complete misunderstanding of what CTE is, this conflation of CTE and vocational and not really getting it. And there's this communication barrier that there's kind of existing between business and industry and education. Business and industry doesn't necessarily know how to talk to educators or figure out how to get to them, and educators sometimes don't know how to get to business and industry and talk to them and talk the same language. And so we have to figure out how to work through that. The next kind of group is fiscal barriers, financial barriers. We have secondary facilities that are not of adequate size to accommodate equipment, or don't have the infrastructure to accommodate equipment that's really necessary. Go back to that second slide I had. They have this mental model of a 1965 shop, and that's not really conducive to a modern manufacturing facility. And then we also have some secondary programs that have a 1965 equipment. And again, there's issues around that. And then that last kind of bucket of barriers, that's kind of an odd way to say that, but you get it, is that we have kind of a lack of high quality, sustainable career exploration and career development for secondary students. Or it's missing that career and technical component. And part of that is that's a really complex issue. Minnesota has one of the worst counselor to student ratios in the United States. And when we do have counselors in place, they oftentimes are not really addressing the career components of counseling. They're oftentimes are asked to address the mental health components of counseling. So there's a really big disconnect in that component as well. Another program barrier is sustained and sustainable teacher training on industry equipment and industry expectations. And there's nuance to that too. You know, as I said, I administer the Perkins grant for our region for a consortium of 26 of our school districts. And we have the funds available to do professional development. And I have the ability to leverage those pieces, but not all teachers are really willing and able to do that, because sometimes it's just overwhelming to have all of these things coming at them at once. So we have to figure out, how is this going to work out? So it's not just a matter of build it and they shall come. It's a matter of how do we functionally build a system that works for everybody. And that third program barrier is and this is something that's going to be hard to swallow, but it's something we have to talk about, is that really every industry is competing for the same students. So not only you as manufacturing are competing for the same students, I can have this same conversation with healthcare. and I'm having the same conversation with human services, and every one of those colors on that career wheel are fighting for that same student, because nearly everybody's having these same issues. So how do we have this big overarching conversation in a way that doesn't end up being a fight? Because again, us, like I'm proprietary to this, but this overarching system of E12 looks at this system as career and technical education, because that's what we are. We are not manufacturing in and of itself. We are not agriculture in and of itself. We are not healthcare in and of itself. So how do we navigate that? So it's a really tricky piece that we have to kind of figure out on how to work through, because we are protective of the students, and you all as industry need employers, and in the overarching component, we need a healthy workforce and healthy economy. So how do we rectify all this? It's a big piece that that we have to work through in over time. So one of the things we also don't really have a good understanding or handle of is what's policy. We have this idea that policy is just this thing, but really what policy is, and this is a definition that a good colleague of mine by the name of Dan Lawrence, who he runs a policy fellowship that I have a rural cohort of. He was actually Governor Perpich's deputy chief of staff back in the Governor Perpich days. This is Dan's definition of policy. A policy is a course of action for a given period of time based on a given set of circumstances designed to influence future decisions or actions. So really, it's something that you work. It's a piece that you do right now, based on the circumstances that are existing right now, designed to create a new future. So how do we think about that in the course of the future and based on what we're knowing now? And you all have a lot more influence in this than you think. And I'm going to give a couple examples of that when we get through this. So this is something that a few people on this call have seen before because you've been my policy fellows, but this is what John Kingdon calls the multiple streams framework. So what John Kingdon says is that there's 3 streams going around all the time around policy. And one of the streams, and this isn't like literal streams, these are really ways of thinking. So one of these streams is called the problem stream. We know all of the problems. So really what we these barriers that we said are really functionally the problem streams. So let's pick one of them. Let's pick a simple one, fiscal. We have all of these fiscal problems that are out there. We have money problems, just because everybody thinks they have money problems, okay? So we have this fiscal problem that's always going on there. There's never enough money. There's never enough money for CTE. Let's just say it. Whether we can agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. This is just an example. So we have this problem out there, that this floating out there, that there's not enough money for CTE, okay? And then there's the politics about that. And the politics is, okay, fine, some people think it is, some people don't think it is, whatever. But oftentimes it just doesn't rise to the level of importance within the political community. And then there's the solution stream out there that says, well, I have, Troy, I have a good idea. I can consider myself an expert within this realm of fiscal policy around career and technical education, and I have a good solution for that. And I have a good policy solution for that, but nobody's listening to me. But I have a good solution, and I think the solution is increasing the equalization factor on the CTE revenue, to then switch the burden from on the CTE levy side to the revenue side, and therefore it takes it off the local tax base and it puts it back to the state government side. They've already budgeted for it. It really doesn't make any difference. The money's there. Okay, there, easy, right? Makes all sense, right? Nod your head and smile, right? So these three streams are out there, but what oftentimes happens until the three streams align, nothing happens. There's a problem, there's a solution, but the politics really aren't important enough yet. There's not enough of a political will to make that the three streams come together and do what's called open up what's considered the policy window. So this graphic shows that sometimes two of them will come together. We might have the problem and the solution come together, and there's enough of a groundswell of a conversation that says we almost get there, but until the politics, the political will comes to a point where it hits the ground and we can all come to an agreement, nothing really ultimately happens. So that's called the policy window. So what we've got to figure out, so an example of when actually the policy window opens is a really overarching example. When, you know, let's talk about 9/11. Did we know a problem existed prior to 9/11 about national security? Yeah, there were people all forever talking about bad national security things happening. Was there a solution? Yeah, there are people all for many years prior to 9/11 saying we need to do this around national security, but nobody was listening because the politics weren't there. The political stream wasn't there to make it enough of an importance. 9/11 happened. All of a sudden, the proverbial you know what hit the you know what. So that opened the policy window. So how do we open the policy window within career and technical education to actually get some of these things to happen? Back to this. You all have a lot more pieces. You have a key to the piece of the puzzle opening these policy windows. Looking at even some of these things. So subsequent to identifying these barriers, I had the opportunity to testify at a House hearing about some of this stuff. Okay, there was three of us from. I currently serve as the president of the Minnesota Association of Career and Technical Administrators. We were invited to testify at a House hearing. Guess what we talked about? And then provided feedback because they asked us to provide feedback on policy recommendations. We addressed our policy recommendations were changing labor age restrictions, changing state graduation requirements, talking about changing faculty credentialing requirements. We spent our entire 15 minutes of testimony, which you never generally get 15 minutes of testimony. You usually get 2 to 3 minutes, talking about the fundamental misunderstanding of career and technical education. We talked about CTE funding and how we could potentially change that revenue from levy to revenue because they have the money in the budget already. We talked about career exploration and career development. We talked about training. We have the potential of a policy window. And why were those the topics that we talked about? Because you have a group right here that helped influence that. So we had a whole great big part of a legislative committee, really because of this group, in 2 meetings. I can give you, if you want, I'll give you the link to the testimony. So that was pretty huge. In 2 meetings, you significantly impacted this legislative group. Now, is this going to fundamentally switch and change? Not right now. Did it open the window? Probably not yet. But legislation is a long-term process that hopefully will functionally change over the course of time. So I'm going really fast, and because I'm also noticing my time is just about up. So you all have a voice. And this piece really does impact and make a great big difference. So I appreciate that. And know that these intersections are so incredibly important. And this work that you all, this small group has done is significantly impacted in a really short amount of time. Great big pieces, because I remember also having, I think it was Mark that had said, I don't know how we're going to impact this. I don't know how can we have anything to do with this? Well, in 2 meetings you already have, pretty big time. So you have a voice, way more than you think you do. So I feel like I just to you all for 15, 20 minutes. So please, what do you have for questions for me?
Okay, Troy, thank you so much. We do have some questions rolling in here. So first one would be, how else do we make our voice known?
That's a great question. And I think one of the first things that I'm going to suggest, get to know your people. The first thing that you need to do, and I'm not seeing who all's on this call right now or this piece, is that create relationships with the legislators, and they're good people. They are really generally really good people wanting to do really good things. And career and technical education is not a partisan thing. It's really about the sustained economy of Minnesota. And let's make it about the sustained economy of Minnesota. I generally say, without career and technical education, we would not have had an essential workforce in Minnesota last March. If you think about that, without career and technical education, we would not have had a sustained workforce, an essential workforce last March. And that's the message I oftentimes send. So number one, create a relationship, and create a relationship that's not based on I need something. Your relationship has to be just there are friends and neighbors, okay? And number two, educate yourself. And that really should have been the first thing, honestly. We have to have a really good fundamental understanding of what we're talking about, because if we're going in with the wrong language, we're starting off with the wrong foot. If we go in with the vocational mindset, not using the career and technical mindset, we're ultimately going to, proverbially hurt the cause, if that makes sense. And if you need help with that, let's figure out how to do that.
Thank you. And as a reminder too, you can submit your questions in the chat, and I will relay those to Troy. So next question would be, how many schools have CTE programs in our region?
So I work, my footprint, so Lakes Country Service Cooperative is the 9 counties of Economic Development Region 4. And of those 9 counties, I have 26 of the school district. I work with the Perkins Consortia. And all 26 districts have some level of CTE programming. They may or may not be aligned to manufacturing. And this is also a tricky thing with rural schools too, is that, they're not, like, manufacturing is really kind of a tricky thing. Manufacturing doesn't necessarily mean they're being taught by a manufacturing teacher. Manufacturing programs are oftentimes held within agriculture programs. So this notion that they have to be pure manufacturing, I think is a misstep, because we're small. I mean, Ashby, Dustin Steenblock's a teacher from Ashby, and he's on this Zoom. Ashby doesn't have a capacity of a large enough student population to have a manufacturing teacher, an agriculture teacher, family consumer science teacher, a medical careers teacher, a fill in the blank, to hit all of those 7 areas. So how are we being smart and leveraging all types of pieces? So 26 schools, there's at least 1 program in every school.
Thank you, Troy. I have a question here from Scott. What solutions options have been discussed between secondary leaders and post-secondary leaders?
I think that's a great question. Those conversations are ever evolving and ever and ever present. And I think you've got one of the things that I think is oftentimes misunderstood is you've got two systems that, while they're both education, they are really very different systems. And frankly, neither are nimble, and neither, and like within like post-secondary, even within post-secondary, there are subsystems within those systems that are more nimble than each other. So I would argue that in order to create solutions, you first have to identify problems. And those who have been a part of this manufacturing educator solutions thing know that I'm pretty adamant about first finding the barriers and the problems before you go to solutions. And I would argue that sometimes we've not collectively found the really root problems before we've gone to solutions. So until we really get to identifying root problems, solutions that we've come up with tend to not be effective. That's not a really good answer, but that's the honest truth.